Hey everybody, welcome back to Generation Gap. As last time, I'm Sam, and I'm joined here with Paul.
Hey
So
Sam.
Paul,
Hello,
what do we
hello
got going on for
listeners.
music this week?
Tonight, for this episode, for our episode 2 of Generation Gap, we decided to mix it up a little bit. So Sam and I picked an album that we both revere. We both love this album, and it's Transatlanticism by Death Cab for Cutie. So we're going to be talking about this album uh, today. I'm very excited to talk about it. That's what's coming up first, and then for our second choice today, we picked an album that both of us felt needed like a second or third or 15th listen, right? Something
Yeah,
that something that I don't particularly like. Maybe Sam was like, I guess, but it's by a band that we love, a band called U2. I'm sure you've heard of them, but it's their album Pop from 1997, which is like, I'm sure there are plenty of U2 fans out there who would be like, what album? Which album? I'm not really sure that I know Pop. So um, we're gonna talk about we gave it a like, I don't know, tenth chance today by listening to it, and we'll
yep.
talk about it for a little bit on this episode of Generation Gap.
It was an experience. I will say that.
It was an experience. So and then we'll finish up the podcast today with On Repeat, and then we will revisit the Billboard Top 10 chart for the week of October 11th, 1987. I will not reveal what song was number one in 1987 until the end.
That is October 12th, the time of recording.
Right, right. So I think we should get started talking about Transatlanticism by Death Cab for Cutie. First of all,
Yeah.
I think you know, like, I'm a huge Death Cab for Cutie fan.
hmm
Um, I think you know more about their sort of like their process and their sort of beginnings as a band. They've gone through some different itinerations as a band.
Yeah, they have. It took them a while to find a drummer. Their current
Went through
drummer,
a
Jason
few.
McGurr,
Yeah,
is did start on Transatlanticism. That was his first album with them.
right.
And then recently, well, fairly recently, their guitarist Chris Walla left and was replaced by Dave Depper, and he was an original member. And Dave Depper first appeared on their 2018 album "Thank You for Today," another album that we both love and revere.
Love, right? Absolutely. It's a fantastic album. Fantastic album. So
Really
basically,
fantastic album, yeah.
now, so Death Cab, Death Cab basically was a band that indie rock band, late '90s, right?
Yep.
And they basically recorded some music and then sort of just decided to tour the hell out of their music, right? To get it in front of as many people as they could. That's kind of what I'm understanding about the early part of Death Cab.
Yeah, they recorded their first album, 1998, something about airplanes, and I think it was in one of the band members' mom's attic or something, or maybe a house they were renting. It was in some attic that they recorded it, and they really did try and tour it, and they were a regional favorite for a while.
Right,
And it was their second album, We Have the Facts and Are Voting Yes, that
right.
people started to somewhat pay attention outside of the Pacific Northwest. And then it was Transatlanticism that finally immersed them
Right,
into what they are now.
right, right. So you could, you could, Transatlanticism, I think, was their major breakthrough album. And one of
Yeah.
the things that I think that before we start talking about some of the music is that um, it sounded to me when I did a little bit of research for this episode that they kind of toured themselves into a I don't know, they toured themselves, they kind of ran themselves ragged, and they were
Mm.
kind of just like, we need to stop playing music for a while, take a little bit of a break, and kind of regroup to see what's next for this band. And I think that was a really, really smart move for them to do, because in addition to just taking a break and being human again, that's when they found Jason, and I think that was a huge, huge step forward musically, and like, he brings a lot to the band.
I agree. And it's also worth noting that Ben never really took time off because
Right.
when Death Cab took a break after the photo album, their third album, Ben met Jimmy Tamborello from the band Dentel, and
Mhm.
they did the Postal Service together, which is
Right.
another album that is revered in Ben Gibbard's
Yes.
catalog.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Um,
It's crazy
so
though that he made both Give Up and Transatlanticism in the same year,
in the same year.
all
Right.
written 18 months of each other. That's insane.
It's insane. It's insane. And obviously he had a ton of material, a wealth of material that he just was. I feel like I feel like he was writing music every day.
Yeah, he must have been.
He must have been, because to be able to put out that much music, that much fantastic music, how many, how much are you just writing? What kind of output must you have to be able to do that?
Yeah,
Um,
and even so, like Ben to this day will tell you that Transatlanticism is the best thing he's done.
yes, I remember. I remember last year during the sort of height of the lockdown days, he was doing those at home sessions.
Those were
Um,
so cool.
it was so cool, and like I remember him referencing transatlanticism a few times, and just uh, uh, to basically to that extent that like it was a sort of a highlight for him musically, and both musically and as a lyricist. Um, and I think before we start talking about the music, the last thing I'll mention is that I remember reading somewhere that after they toured for years and they needed a break, Ben moved to Silver Lake, which it's a really sort of trendy neighborhood in Los Angeles. Um, and I spent a lot of time there myself about 10 years ago. And I have to admit, knowing the neighborhood the way that I do and listening to the music, there is a definite correlation. I think a lot of the themes that we're going to talk about and a lot of the feelings that are on transatlanticism do correlate pretty pretty sort of overtly to that neighborhood.
I haven't been, and I didn't actually know that you went there until right now. And anybody that is familiar with this album knows that
Yep.
Silver Lake is referenced in Death Cab's
Reference, yes.
Transatlanticism,
Yep.
specifically in Tiny Vessels.
Right. Right. And yeah, so knowing that too, in fact, there's probably people that may have listened to that album, 100 times and not picked up on that, or listened to the lyrics Silver Lake and not understand that it's a very interesting part of Los Angeles. Now, I'm not really sure what it's like today, but I did spend some time there about 10 years ago, and um, it's it's there in the music. The neighborhood is there in the music. Yeah, for sure.
That's
Um,
cool. That brings a whole
yeah,
new element for that
yeah,
album for me, though, to know that that does capture the spirit of a place somewhere.
definitely. And I can elaborate a little bit about that. So Transatlanticism is released in 2003. It was released October 7th, 2003. So we just missed the sort of anniversary by a few days here of recording this podcast. Um, and I think one of the things that we need to touch upon first when talking about this album, there's two things, of course, for me that are at the top of the list. Is that number one, it is a concept album, and
Mm.
it's one of the most connected, sort of most complete concept albums. I think this album tells a narrative. There's a narrative at play in this music. Then it would be hard for me to think of another concept album that has such a beautifully evident under like this. There's this undercurrent, this palpable narrative of a story that's taking place from the minute the music starts until the CD ends. There's a story in this music, and I think that is just so absolutely fantastic because I love concept albums.
Mm.
That's number one. Number two is that a little bit like the music that we were talking about on last week's episode. Um, it everybody has like a people make personal connections to music. Um, and I would love to hear more. Like I love talking to people about their personal connections to music. I feel like this is the kind of album that if you haven't been in love, um, at least once in your life, you kind of miss the meaning.
I completely agree with that completely.
Because this whole album, from the first chords to the last 10 seconds, it's about being in love. It's about losing love, and it's about sort of where to go from there. What's next?
I've always felt that this album was about being in love with somebody, but feeling like it's not working. Like it's almost like the slow, implosion of a relationship is how I've always felt it. And it's there's a lot of long distance
Right.
theme in this record, and that's definitely the thing in this narrative
Yes.
that's making that relationship fail. And it's that really awful feeling you get where this isn't going to go well, but what else are you going to do?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think, yes, I agree with you. I also feel like the album does not necessarily portray love, being in love with another person, in the most positive of lights. It kind of
No, it doesn't.
shows, no, it shows the messiness and the sort of almost maybe futile extents that some people go to make a relationship work.
Yeah, it's a very realistic portrayal of
Yes.
what being in love is. And that's what's really incredible about it, is because a lot of Disney movies and movies that we see growing up romanticize it and make it seem like it's this thing that everything's wonderful and perfect all the time, but in reality it's a really difficult thing, and
Messy.
it's really more complex than I can even analyze.
Right, right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And there's a certain unpredictability that I feel like a lot of people who have been in love understand. Like, you don't know what next week or next month or next year is going to mean for your relationship.
Yeah.
What are some adjectives that come to mind for you when you listen to the songs on this album?
um That's a really good question. I don't know if I
Okay.
have any answer to that, because I don't really think in terms of like that.
Okay.
It's more of an emotional place that it sends me.
Okay.
Do you know what I mean? Like when
Yeah.
I listen to it, I don't picture somewhere else. I picture how it relates into what's happening,
Yeah.
in my life. Because there was a period, maybe 2, 3 years ago, where this album really did ring
Yeah.
true for me.
Oh yes.
Do you know what I mean? And like every time I listen to it, I don't think of any kind of words or place. I think about exactly where I was when I was feeling like that
Yes.
2 or 3 years ago. I think about that person that was causing that, if that
Okay.
makes sense.
Of course. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I think I definitely would. I agree with you. I've kind of been there too in that same situation. Um, some of the words that come to me, the the I think you already mentioned the word distance, and that's a theme that is sort of like overarching in this music. Is there's a there's many references to distance and barriers, whether they are actually physical barriers or mental or sort of like metaphysical barriers that people put up for themselves. Um, and I think that's a really interesting thing to talk about in the same music. You have this idea that there are certain things that get in the way of people being together. Space, someone living across country, someone who moves to London to go to college, right? And that person is now across an ocean, right? And the feelings are still very much there, but you can't go see them right now
Yeah,
unless you are willing to buy a plane ticket and go to London. So there's this idea of distance and like being distanced maybe against each other's will. Like, I'm going to go do this. It's not because I don't love you, but I'm going. Right? I hear that
right.
in the songs. And then uh, there's this idea of like the barriers that we put up for ourselves. This idea that what's the old cliche? Everybody, you're like your own worst enemy, right? So there's this idea, and it's very evident for me in like the song Tiny Vessels. There's this idea that there's someone that is two people that are attracted to each other, two people that can obviously have some type of very, very, very intimate connection, but it doesn't mean anything. They set it up, they almost set it up so
Yeah.
that it's not going to mean anything, right? And that's such an interesting idea for me, such an interesting concept, especially to like so because I think in the lyrics to Tiny Vessels, it's overtly stated that whatever this encounter is fleeting, meaningless. It's just an encounter to
I've
some degree.
always I've always taken it a little differently.
Okay, I'd love to know.
Um, it seems like the relationship is meaningless to the narrator, and we don't know if it's meaningless to the other person.
Oh, that's true. It is one-sided.
And what I've always thought was very interesting about that song, and I haven't really heard it anywhere else,
Okay.
is that normally when you listen to a breakup song, it's from the perspective of the person that was broken up with. But I've
Hmm.
always taken Tiny Vessels as being a song from the perspective of the person that's ending things. And we sometimes fail to remember that ending things can be just as traumatic as being broken up with. Breaking off relationship can be traumatic as well.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah, no, that's true. It's an interesting observation that usually you're right. It's usually the heartbroken sort of tale that's told in music, whereas this is the opposite. It's that nope, I was done. I was done.
I'm,
I
I'm
walked,
done.
I'm done, and I walked away. Right.
And you
Um,
could make the argument that he maybe regrets it based on some of the lines in the title track Transatlanticism, which comes next.
right. Right.
But even if things do get another, even if they do try and pick things up again, by
Yeah.
the ending, a lack of color, like it clearly hasn't worked.
It hasn't worked. Right. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about that a little bit. Like now, I love every song on the album. To me, is gorgeous. I feel like again, since it's a concept album, I feel like you are doing yourself a massive disservice as a listener and an experiencer of music if you skip a track. Um, I think the tracks in the beginning of the album, um, every track through Passenger Seat, I think is unbelievably good. And then there's a couple that are they don't have the same sort of I don't know the word I'm looking for. Almost like magical sort of like vibe that like Death of an Interior Decorator doesn't really have that. I don't know. What do you think about that?
I actually have a theory about this, and I
Okay.
think the album is better for Death of an Interior Decorator.
Oh, no, I'm not saying it shouldn't be there because it is a
No,
great song. It's just yeah.
well, what I'm getting at is that without Death of an Interior Decorator, the last two songs wouldn't be as
Mm,
emotionally poignant because
okay.
We Look Like Giants is a
Yeah.
angry song for Death Cab for Cutie.
Yes, it is. And again, it's the angriest song on this. It's definitely the angriest song on this album for sure.
Without a doubt. And it's like the fight before the breakup. And then you've got A Lack of Color, which is just completely devastating. And it's got some of my favorite lyrics,
Of
ever written in it.
ever written. Right. We'll get there. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll get
No,
there.
we'll get there. So I think with the opening track of the new year, which is just musically, this album opens so beautifully. What do you think that note or that sound is at the beginning of the album? Because the album starts with this sound whenever the tape starts to roll. There's this hum, this something, and then it's at the beginning and it's at the end. What do you suppose that is? I don't know that anyone knows.
I'm going to look it up. Hang on.
Yeah, there's a lot of
But
different theories.
in the meantime, I
Yeah.
do have an idea as to why it's at the beginning and the end.
Okay. Okay. Go ahead.
I think this is supposed to be cyclical. And
Okay.
this is
Right.
definitely something that can happen multiple times in your life.
Yeah. Right. Yes. Right. So this narrative that this album tells isn't like beginning and end, and then they right. It could easily happen again. You're saying next year.
Yeah, with a different person. You know what I
Different
mean? It
person,
could be
different
singing
different
about a
event.
different person in Silver Lake.
Right.
It's very possible.
Right. Okay. All right. While we're kind of while Sam is doing some quick googling, um, I love the line in the new year again. Right back to this idea of barriers. This idea of he says he wish he could travel. What is it? I wish I could travel.
I
just
have
by
the lyrics. I brought up the
folding,
lyric sheet.
yeah, just by folding a map, right? No more airplanes or speed trains or freeways. Do I have it right? I think I have it
Yeah,
right.
it's I wish the world was flat like the old
Old
days, so I
days,
could
yeah.
travel just by folding a map. No more airplanes or speed trains or freeways. There'd be no distance that could hold us back.
All right. So right in the first song, really some of the first lyrics is this idea of travel, this idea of um, needing to travel to get to one another, and this idea of distance and how inconvenient distance is, right?
Yeah,
Now in California, they call an interstate or any type of like multi-lane highway, they would always call it a freeway. So there's a little bit of California kind of just popping itself into this first track. People in Silver Lake would call it a freeway. Like I have to get on the freeway to go see whoever, right? So that kind of pops in right off the bat. I don't think they call it a freeway in Seattle, but I honestly don't know. But in California, it's a freeway.
it could just be like a ryming thing too,
It could be.
just
It
because
could
it
be.
fit better lyrically. Though my question about the new year, and I've never been able to figure this out, is
Yeah.
what does he mean by so this is the new year and I have no resolution.
Yeah.
It's self-assigned penance for problems with easy solutions.
Mm. Well, that's a good question. That's a deep lyric. I'm not really sure.
I've
Yeah.
never been able to figure out that one.
Assigned penance. Yeah. Hmm. I don't know. Really good. Yeah.
I think we're just gonna have to get him on this podcast.
I think we have to. Yeah, we're going to invite Ben. I really hope
Yeah.
Ben would come. I would love to. And he'd be like, "I'll come on your podcast, but I'm not going to talk about transatlanticism for the entire time." I'd be like,
No, I
yeah,
want to talk about the new single.
yeah. So, I don't know. I think if I could, I think that's the noise, this sort of rhythmic noise that I was talking about at the beginning and the end. I think this is just my personal view, is that it is either the hum of some form of transportation. So like
Yeah,
being on an airplane, right? You're flying on an airplane. There's always you can always hear the air rushing past, the sound of the engines. Or if you're on a on like a bus or something, or even riding in a car, there's always this sort of din, this sort of like rhythmic noise in the background, and that's what I think that opening sort of sound is supposed to be. This idea of travel in one way or another.
I could definitely see that, and it would make sense simply because of how much travel is a central theme in this album.
Yeah,
Travel and distance, and I think almost every form of travel is probably mentioned
yeah,
somewhere.
I think so.
Um, but I did find this that was interesting. Is I googled uh, the new year, and I was looking at
Yeah,
that line, the self-assigned penance line. So the
yeah,
definition from penance
yeah.
is voluntary self-punishment inflicted as an outward expression of repentance for having done wrong.
Right. Yeah, it has like it often has a religious connotation. Penance.
So it could almost be like I don't know, guilt or
Hmm.
feeling like you've done something wrong because let's not forget he does the narrator does break up with the other person in this, so
Yeah, yeah,
it
yeah.
could be coming full circle. I don't know. This is just me speculating
Yeah,
because
yeah, no, and that's part of what we do here. I mean, this is the interpretation of the music for us. And again, for anyone that's listening, feel free to comment and
email.
contact us, email, and be like, I don't think so. Like, I don't see it that way. Again, music is interpretive. There's a lot of different ways to listen to this. Um, so yeah, I think that's I was when I listened to the album today twice. I've always been aware of that, how it opens with the same sound, ends with the same sound, and then I thought today, like, I think that's supposed to be someone on an airplane or driving somewhere. Yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah.
could see that.
Um, the lyrics in some of these songs are so simple, but they are haunting,
Yep.
beautiful lyrics. Do you think, and I am not a songwriter. I'm a writer, but I'm not a songwriter. Do you think it's harder to write lyrics that are that simple and that meaningful? I think it's got to be really, really difficult to do that.
Hmm. I am a songwriter. I'm not trying to plug my stuff here,
Right.
but in my own personal experience, and that's really all I can speak from,
Yeah.
is I find it difficult to write things that other people have an emotional reaction to, and that really does come down to what you're saying. And it is difficult to write lyrics that stick
Mm-hmm.
and that haunt. And the usual rule of thumb is that if it haunts you, then
Yes.
you use it because it'll haunt somebody else. And
Yes.
from my own experience with this craft, and I think this is pretty obvious, there is no way that he could write something this specific and haunting without this being at least semi autobiographical.
Oh, 100%. It has to come from life, right? To some degree, it comes from life.
This
Yes.
has to. I mean, I
Yeah.
know the fact that he said that there are lines in "We Look Like Giants" that
Oh,
are hidden messages to an ex girlfriend of his.
interesting. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. The track title and registration is another just it's just such a beautiful song, and it literally, I mean, that's what. So every line in title and registration is just so simple. So it literally on the surface is a song, about the glove box or a glove compartment in a car, and it's like, wait, that shouldn't be a song, but it's such a beautiful song, and the idea, the lyric that stands out for me is that, um, again, speaking about a glove compartment in a car, because behind its door there's nothing to keep my fingers warm. All I find are souvenirs from better times, right? And you have, I mean, everybody, again, that's of a certain age, yes, has at some point been in their car and like opened the glove box or opened the console and have been looking for like chapstick and found like a movie ticket stub from when you went with your girlfriend or boyfriend to the movies like 2.5 years ago, and it
Mm.
just smacks you in the face, and it just stops you for the rest of the day
Yeah.
because you find this souvenir that you were not intending to find. You don't even remember how it got there, but there it is, and it's just reminding you of this relationship that is either
Yeah.
not
You
the
can't
same
think of
or
anything
over.
about it.
Yep.
You can't think about anything else, and I've had that. I've had that happen to me, as I'm sure most people have.
Most people probably have, right?
I always imagine this song whenever I listen to it is just like you're pulled over on the side of the road. It's in the
Yeah.
middle of December. It's icy. It's bitter cold, and
Yeah.
you're just like trying to scramble and find something in your glove compartment. And yeah, you just find that, and you're just out there in the bitter cold, and it almost like reflects the feeling of finding that
Yeah.
movie ticket or picture, or even if it's just like
Something.
you're walking around and you check your phone, and your phone sends you those like those memory photos, and it's of you and
Right.
your other person. It's like,
Right.
oh,
Ugh. Yep. No, it's true. Yeah, it's a again, the lyrics on paper, on a screen, they're so simple. They're so beautifully written, but there's just this haunting quality. Um, and again, the song references distance. It references someone leaving to go somewhere else. There's this reference of you're there, I'm here.
yeah, I'm here.
Um, so I I think that everyone who loves this album, anyone who listens to this album and has this album sort of like holds the album dearly, like we do. To me, the middle three tracks, so Tiny Vessels, Transatlanticism, and then Passenger Seat. I am going to go ahead and say this, and I don't think I'll ever take it back. They're some of the most beautifully written songs of all time. Especially when they fit into context of some of the things that we've just been discussing. Um,
Absolutely.
they are the most beautiful little narrative. It's a little mini story. I mean, the whole album, like we said, is a narrative, but within these three songs is, in my opinion, one of the most beautiful narratives ever told in popular music.
I've said it before. I've even said it on air of radio stations that
Yeah.
the Tiny Vessels, Transatlanticism, and Passenger Seat is the greatest 3 song run of any 3 songs on any album ever made.
ever made, and I will stand by that. I agree with you 110%. It is just such a fantastic. Um, Not, the music is fantastic. The lyrics are some of the most beautiful lyrics uh, that I can think of. But then again, this story of Tiny Vessels is, to me, um, about an encounter, right? There's an encounter between two people that seem to not know each other, right?
Yeah.
Is that how you interpret it? This idea,
Um, yeah, I could almost interpret it like that. Yeah, I could go along with that. It could be the people that it could be the same person that the narrator was singing about earlier, but at the same time, it could be somebody different because you could interpret it as one long narrative between two people, or you could talk about it that you could view it as the narrator coming in and out of different people's lives that he's attracted to.
okay, all right. So maybe it isn't referring to. There's a possibility that it might not be one person. It's just
I
maybe
think
that
it works either way though really
it
well.
does. It does. It does work either way. I agree with you. So there's this idea that it's fleeting. There's this encounter. There's this there's this intimate experience between two people, and then the way that I hear the music is that they leave. Right. It's a brief thing. It could be the proverbial maybe one night stand type of thing, and then it ends. Right. In theory. And then the song, again, not to belay this over and over again, but it makes one of the most beautiful transitions in any music that I can think of, any popular music. The song goes from Tiny Vessels to the title track, Transatlanticism, in the most unbelievable way. Um, I, it's enough that now I've listened to these songs more times than I could ever count. I've been listening to this album pretty much since it came out. It has been one of my favorite albums for just about 20 years now. What, the album's 18 years old now, and the transition from Tiny Vessels to Transatlanticism, I don't know. There's the rhythmic sound. We're not really sure what it is. It sounds, could be footsteps, could be marching. There's almost like a little bit of a heartbeat vibe. What do you think?
I've always taken it as the raindrops because
Because
the
rain,
opening
yeah,
lines was
yes,
the Atlantic was born today, and I'll tell you how. The clouds above opened up and let it out.
right.
So I've
Okay.
always taken it as the raindrops that
Rain,
are referenced in the opening line.
rhythm, yeah. So again, and rain can be very rhythmic. There can be a pattern. Whatever it is, it's haunting. It's beautiful. And the piano, when it comes in, it it's it's gut wrenching. It's
I
the
have
most
to say,
music.
I've seen Death Cab for Cutie live. I saw him
Yeah,
one time at this
yeah,
tiny venue in New Haven, and they
yeah,
closed the show with Transatlanticism.
yeah.
And it was probably one of the most surreal moments of my life to
Oh
hear
yeah,
the raindrops because they replicated it live. They played an audio recording of the raindrops,
yeah,
and then Ben came in with the piano and sang it, and
yeah.
to um, sing "I Need You So Much Closer" with 2,000 other people at the top of my lungs was
Right,
an experience I'll never forget.
right,
And the "So Come On" and "So Come On" part too.
right. So transatlanticism. These two people have separated. They are, the way that I interpret the song, they are trying to find each other again. They are realizing that it wasn't fleeting, that it did mean something, and they want it back somehow, but they're separated by an ocean. It sounds like they're separated by an ocean. And there's this line that Sam just said, and it's the most simple line you could ever write. I need you so much closer, which is the refrain of this song that is repeated over and over again. And it is just, it's again, it is the simplest words that you could say, but there is something about these words that, again, I will go out and I will say that these are some of the greatest lyrics in music history, popular music history.
Look, the thing is that every song in this album has lyrics that are haunting and everything like that. But
Beautiful.
literally every single line in these three run of songs just
Yeah.
is completely. I don't even know.
Yeah, I know, and we're geeking out a little bit on this album because it means so much to us. But anyone who's a Death Cab fan, anyone who's listened to this music for a long time, there's something about this music. I mean, I know that Death Cab had T-shirts for a while that said "I need you so much closer" on the T-shirt, and it's like, what? It's hard for me to think of another band that could put a lyric like that, a simple lyric like that, and have people be like, "Yep, I know what that's from."
Yeah,
Right?
exactly, and
And it
for
takes
it
them
not to be corny either, you know, because I feel like if
not to be
another
corny,
artist did that, it would be
kind of cheesy.
kinda
Yeah,
cheesy.
yeah. And then yeah, and then so it that song fades beautifully into Passenger Seat, which is one of the quieter tracks on the album. It's very subtle. It's very delicate. It has I think some of Ben's best vocal work is on Passenger Seat. It's such a beautiful song, um, and I feel like again the way that I interpret this music is that the two people who originally had met in tiny vessels have found each other again. They're driving together somewhere because he references being in a car, and they're together for the time being. There is no sense in the song that it's going to last. There's no sense that it's going to work out. There's this feeling, like Sam said way back at the beginning, that maybe this isn't the good. It might not be a healthy thing that they're doing, but for right now in that song, they're together.
And they're incredibly happy for right there in that moment in that song. It's one of those weird moments that you have, and I've definitely had these moments
Mm-hmm.
very few times, but it's happened where
Mm-hmm.
I've been with somebody and been doing an activity with them, and it could just be driving around or it could be just, you know, hanging out somewhere and it's somebody that I'm, you know, really into.
Mm-hmm.
But I also have the self-conscious, not the self-conscious, but the self-awareness to know that this is just for right now. Like this is once this moment is done, this is completely done.
Yes,
And that's what this song is, and that's why it connects with me so much.
absolutely.
Especially the part that really just destroys me
Yeah.
is the bridge at the very end. You know, when you
Yes.
feel embarrassed, I'll be your pride. When you need directions, then I'll be the guide for all time. And the way he sings that and the change in piano
Yes.
is one of my favorite moments ever recorded.
Yes. It's a great moment. It's a great. I agree with you that we've all had those moments where you're doing something that is just so right for that moment, and then you do not want it to end, but you know it's going to, and you know that yeah, maybe you do something similar next tomorrow, maybe you do something similar in 2 weeks, but you know that it will never be the same as it was that time,
Right, exactly.
which is powerful. To me, that's powerful. It's such a powerful statement in this song. Um, the album progresses. We talked a little bit about some of the other tracks towards towards the end of the album. The last track too is just oh man, it's it's a hard track. It's a hard track in the sense that it's just so sad. So, what are some of your favorite lyrics from this track? The, they're so great.
Um, it's a couple lines that are sequenced together. So it's first, and all the girls in every girly magazine can't make me feel any less alone.
Ooh, yeah, that's
Like
deep.
that's
Yeah,
I remember the
yeah,
first time I heard that and was really taken aback by that. And then he
sure.
goes on to it to goes on to sing the very next line to call it 7:03 and on your machine I slur a plea for you to come home.
To come
And it's
home.
like it just there's such like desperation in that last line. Like he's just on this complete self-destructive loneliness streak. It's hard not to relate to because we've all had those nights where we're just like a complete lonely mess.
Yes, and we're yes, and maybe we do think right, and maybe we reach out to people or desperately want to talk to someone for maybe the wrong reasons or something like that. But yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. Yeah. Um, there's some desperation in this track, right? It's desperate. It's a little desperate, I think. Um, and then the album ends with a line, lyrics that are almost for me as powerful as "I need you so much closer." It ends with "This is fact, not fiction," for the first time in years, and that is repeated twice in the song. Um, and then it ends, and then we have the rhythmic sound, which is could be airplane, car, we don't know, and that's the end. This is profound for me, I think, to end an album this way. Um, hmm. So what
Ooh,
are lyrics? What are these lyrics?
I just had a thought actually
Yeah.
about this
Yeah.
record,
Yeah.
and it ties into the first part because we were trying to figure out the self-assigned penance line earlier,
Okay.
and that line just I okay. So get this. So we're gonna go back to tiny vessels and how I was talking about earlier, how that is almost like from the perspective of the person that's doing the ending.
Yeah.
And it almost seems like they got back together and it ended again. Do you know what I
Yes.
mean? But
Yes.
this time he was broken up with the narrator,
Yep.
and that's where the self-assigned penance comes from, and it's starting again. So now it's almost like this was
Yeah.
like a rebound, which is why it meant nothing for him in Tiny
Right.
Vessels.
Oh,
And
interesting.
then he
So
realized it didn't work, and then he rebounds again, and then it's just a cycle of that.
yeah. Ooh, I had never thought of it that way.
It
Interesting.
literally just came to
Yeah.
me right now.
Yeah. And then to end an album with this idea of this is fact, not fiction. So for me, that is like the epilogue, right? Of a book. It's like,
Yeah,
okay, the narrative is now over and it's time to get back to what's real. Right? It's like just
that's like
it's a, it's a slap in the face ending, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
that's exactly what I was gonna say, like word for word.
Word for word. Yeah, crazy. It's such a powerful way to end an album.
Just another interesting little
Sure.
tidbit about this album.
Yeah.
He references the JAMC in "We Look Like Giants." Do you know
Yes.
what that means? Because I know what that means.
I do not know what that means.
That's a reference to a band called the Jesus and Mary Chain,
Okay.
which their second album, Darklands, I guess Ben Gibbard is a massive fan of, and that's one of the coded messages to his ex in that song.
Ah, and they went
I
to see
guess
this.
they did used to sit in the car and listen to the JAMC
Okay. Okay.
frequently.
That's awesome. See,
So
wow. Deep.
deep.
Well, transatlanticism will always be one of my um, most personal. It's one of the most personal connections that I have to music, um, and it always seems to. Maybe it's because it was released this time of year, but I've said to Sam a few times, I never really seem to find myself listening to it on like in July. I always seem to find myself listening to it in the fall.
I don't really listen to any Death Cab in the summer.
No,
I mean, not that I don't ever. I have listened to Death Cab in the summer, and
sure,
I'm not opposed to it, but it's just not the same as the autumn time for whatever reason.
yeah, interesting. Well, if you've never listened to it, or maybe you haven't listened to it in, I don't know, 5 or 10 years, I highly recommend that you do this. If you've been in love recently, if you've been burned by love recently, it is going to be. It might not be easy to get through the whole album because you're going to have moments where you maybe feel it and feel it pretty
I
good.
still do, and I've listened to this time album
Yes,
more times than I can
yes,
count.
yes. It's beautiful. All right. I think we should move on to our second album. We will spend a little bit less time on this album
Because it's bad.
because because it's not that good. Um, so we decided to listen to Pop by U2, which was released. I wrote it down because like some of U2's catalog, I forget which years they released which albums. So they released Pop in 1997, March of 1997. So it's going back. This is a pretty old album at this point.
Yes.
I'm a huge U2 fan. U2 was the first music that I liked myself.
Mm.
So, in other words, when I was very, very young, my parents were always listening to music like Elton John, Moody Blues, Aerosmith. And I remember listening to the music because they were playing it. Um, but U2 was the first band as like a 10 or 11-year old that I was like, whoa, this is cool. This is cool. And I want to listen to this more. Octung Baby, which is one of my favorite albums by U2, was the
Great album.
first music that I ever purchased. So like, I had my parents drive me to like the record store, and I bought Octung Baby on CD. Even though I was getting yelled at because it was too expensive to buy a CD, I was like, I don't care. Cool kids buy CDs, and so it was like $27 or something for the CD because they were really expensive in those days.
That's still a lot now for a
It's a
CD.
lot now, and like the cassette was like $9.99. I'm like, I don't want it. I want the CD. So I love U2. I've seen U2 live. They're one of my favorite bands. But like all great bands, like all bigger than life, larger than life, world famous rock bands. They've had high highs and they've had low lows.
Low lows.
And pop is about as low as it gets for the band U2. Um, so I don't even know. So, here's the thing. U2 had a really successful first half of the 1990s. Achtung Baby was a huge success for them. The tour that they did, the Zooropa tour, which supported Achtung Baby, was massive. They played massive cities. They went all over the globe touring this album, and they were some of the biggest rock stars at the time in the early 90s.
Great
And
album, great
great
tour.
album,
Actually, my
great.
dad saw him on that tour.
Oh my god, I'd love to hear what that was like. There you can find. I mean, there's the DVD of them in Sydney, Australia, on the Zooropa tour, which is pretty good. I don't know, some of the it's too much. It's like sensory overload, which is kind of what they were going for. But there's other clips and like bootleg clips or videos on YouTube of them playing different venues. There's a clip from I think Washington D.C. Where they do ultraviolet light. The audio quality is terrible, but the song isn't just. It's Bono's voice is like, okay, how does a human being sing like that? So
That's another one of those songs that I would put up there in terms of like most beautiful songs ever written. Like
oh
it's,
yeah,
and
yeah,
that's another album that you and I could probably geek out
definitely,
about, like we just
oh
did with
definitely,
Transatlanticism.
absolutely. So they had this run. They were world famous rock stars in every sense of the word. Then they released Zooropa, which was basically like B-side material from Achtung Baby, stuff that didn't make the cut, and it was pretty good. I mean, there's Zooropa's kind of a strange album. It has the Achtung Baby feel to it. At least you can say it's cohesive. There's like a theme to the
Yeah.
music, and there's a
I
couple good.
also don't think it's. Oh, sorry.
Well, I mean, "Stay," the song "Stay" was "So Far So Close" is on Zooropa, and Bono has said on many occasions that it's his favorite U2 song.
It's a great
So
song.
it's a great song, and I like the album. I don't know, a lot of people don't like it. I think it's pretty good. It's quirky. It's 90s.
I
I'm not.
like it. I've always thought it was a better album than people gave it credit for, and
Me
a
too.
pretty solid. It's a good like mid '90s experimental record that U2 put out, and that's exactly what it is.
That's exactly what it is. However, I think a lot of their fans at the time were expecting something as good as Octung Baby. Maybe they didn't get it. Maybe they were kind of burned by it. They're like, well, it doesn't have the beautiful, it doesn't have a song like One on it. It doesn't have a song like Ultraviolet or Mysterious Ways on it. I mean, let's face it, almost every song on Octung Baby was a single. Like it was that good.
No, yeah, absolutely. And then Zooropa, they just, and I know when you say a band is being self indulgent, that's normally a bad thing. But I feel like in this case, it was totally justified of U2 riding on the massive success of Octum Baby to say no, we want to make this really self indulgent experimental record, and it worked. The timing of it was good, and I think it was a solid record.
You're talking Zooropa.
Zooropa, yeah.
Yes. Okay. So let me ask you this. So this is what I jotted down today. When I was going back through and really forcing myself to listen to pop. Let me ask you this. Zooropa wasn't the success they thought it was going to be. Obviously, they took a break somewhere in there. Not much of a break, because the Octum Baby tour lasted forever. But there was a little bit of a break, a little bit of time for them to kind of regroup, take some time away from each other. I learned today, maybe I did know this, but I don't know that I knew this. Larry Mullen Jr., drummer for U2, had back issues. I guess he's had them his whole life, and had back surgery um, during the time that they were regrouping to start recording new material. So he wasn't in on a lot of the early planning sessions and recording sessions for this album. Um, and here's the question. Here's what I was wondering. I think a lot of people after Zooropa gave up on U2. A lot of fans. They were like, eh. They had their superstardom. They released this larger than life album, Achtung Baby. And now this is the second album, Zooropa, or whatever, this the follow-up album. Um, I almost wonder if U2 kind of gave up on themselves a little bit. And they kind of let go and said, well, if everyone's kind of giving up on us a little bit, maybe we're going to just take a sharp left turn and that's when they sort of experimented with some of these electronic sounds, drum machines, sampling. The album is heavily sampled.
Yes.
Um, and this is 1996. Technology, the way that most people think of it, especially recording technology, was not great. It was not great. And I feel like they didn't really know. They wanted to use technology and like advance their music technologically speaking, but they didn't know how to do that. They weren't sure what that meant because at the end of the day, these are just four musicians that really are just, they play rock music, they play instruments, and they're like, oh, we're going to become an electronic band. And it's like, no, you're not. But they tried. They tried, right?
They did try.
Um,
I think that one of the biggest, I think, as great as a band U2 is, one of their faults and one of the things that they could do better at is I think that they listen to their fans a little too much and don't trust their gut. Because I think that after people, some of the fans didn't like Zeropa, they kind of gave up on themselves. But in reality, they made a good record. It's not a bad record by any means. I mean, it's not the Joshua Tree or Octane Baby, but
yeah,
it's a solid experimental mid-career album that they felt like they needed to do, and they were in the position to do that.
right.
And I do think that they did kind of give up on themselves simply because of that reaction,
Mm-hmm.
because they just kind of listened too much to external voices.
Not to mention, during the production of Pop, the recording, the production, there was like they were working with a number of different producers. They had a ton of different studio people, in on the recording sessions with them. Like I said, Larry Mullen was like in and out. So it sounded to me like because they were at that point in their career, they were very successful. They had absolutely no budget for this. I mean, whatever it was going to cost to make an album, fine, we're U2. There's no number that can scare us. Whatever it's going to cost us to make this album. So they had the liberty, right, to say if it goes millions of dollars over budget, that's okay at the end of the day, right? So it almost felt like there was a lot of sloppiness in sort of like the approach to making the songs, uh, and the fact that they had, three producers working on this and then other producers working on this track, and then some of the actual band members weren't involved in the making of some of the tracks, and when they heard them they were like, no, no, we got to start over, let's start over. So there's this haphazard quality to a lot of the music.
I agree, and I think that they even recognize that because if you listen to the live versions of these songs, because they did a live album from the Pop Mart tour,
They did.
they are significantly better live
Yes.
than
Well,
they are
haven't
on the album.
and haven't they gone back and like remixed, they've remastered, they've re-recorded, they've tried to sort of like repair the pop legacy as best as they can. But of course, the initial album, the album as it stands as a release, is always going to be there. So,
Yeah,
um, what for me, another thing that just, the songs are so incongruous, and that's something that just drives me insane. Like the album opens with Discotheque, which is a like basically it's a club European kind of club dance mix.
yeah. Like I was saying to you before we started recording, when I listen to that song, 'cause I haven't listened to this album in its entirety since I was just getting into U2, and I took a
Yeah,
deep dive and listened to all their
right.
albums in their entirety. And I think every U2 fan should listen to this album in its entirety at least once.
You have to listen to it.
Yeah.
Yep.
It just reminded me of like a 90s car chase scene
Yes.
with like the biggest,
Yes.
stupidest 90s vehicles ever. Like it was
Yes.
so 90s, it was painful. And then like the lyrics too are so horribly
They're
written.
horrible.
Like the opening line is you can reach, but
Right.
you can't grab it.
Right.
You can hold it, control it. You can't bag it.
Okay. Yep. Yep. And again, yeah, I agree with you. It just, it's so it's a song, and then it's followed by a couple more songs, but then there's other tracks on the album that are like sort of ballady, kind of slow melodic songs that have literally nothing to do with the opening track. And then what's is Mofo the third track?
I'm looking at my CD now.
I believe
Yeah,
it's the
Mofo
third
is the
track.
third track.
Okay. So it's again, Mofo is this weird, like dark techno. I'm not even sure. It's like kind of like trashy European techno. It's like what a B like techno artists would record if they had like bad equipment. We're like, no, I want to do techno. It's like, I don't think you have the right gear.
Listen to this line though, and this line
Yeah.
just like I heard this today, and it made me kind of chuckle when I heard it because it's
No.
just so poorly written. Poorly
Okay.
written. It's holy dunk, space junk coming in for the splash, while dopes on punk staring into the flash, looking for baby Jesus under the trash.
What did I mean? Like you don't even. We spent 40 minutes dissecting Death Cab, beautiful Death Cab lyrics, which never will be recreated. This is like, I don't know if this was just like stream of consciousness writing. I'm not really sure what this is.
That's very possible. Bono
Very
could have just like been like, "All right, you know what? Screw it. I'm gonna lay down a vocal
weird.
track. We'll just. I'm gonna start talking, and we'll see what happens."
Maybe it was like a scat vocal, and then he was like, you know what? I just sang words. They were words, and I'm going to keep them. I have no idea. Um,
And
there's a
what makes no sense is that the rest of the lyrics to this song do make sense. Like, I mean, it's not a well written song or anything, but I get the thought process, or at least like they connect to each other.
yeah,
And then there's that weird verse in the middle about Jesus in the trash and
uh,
space junk coming.
yeah. There's a few gems on the album in the sense that, like you said, "Staring at the Sun" I think is a really cool song. They've done it live several times on several tours. It was a big part of the "All That You Can't Leave Behind" tour.
Mm.
They used to do it kind of acoustically, if I remember correctly. I
And
think it
that
was,
version's great. Like,
yeah,
highly recommend it.
yep,
Fantastic.
yeah,
That's the song in its best form.
yeah. The one from Slane Castle, which everyone is probably familiar with, which to me is one of U2's best. Not only is it one of their best recorded live shows, it just kind of highlights U2 at their absolute peak. And they do "Staring at the Sun." I think they do a little bit of "Wake Up Dead Man" in there too, like maybe like 3 or 4 lines.
They
Uh,
play like the first. They go up to the second chorus. They after the second
yeah,
chorus, they go into "Stuck in a Moment," which
right.
I was texting you about this earlier. Like,
Yeah.
I will stand by the fact that "Wake Up Dead Man" is a criminally underrated song and is the only song in this album that I enjoyed listening to.
Yeah, it is a pretty good song. I do like it. I do like it. There's still that sort of like '90s sort of veneer that it can be. Don't get me wrong, some of my favorite music is from the '90s. Octung Baby is from the '90s, but it's like the '90s veneer in the bad way. It's like the '90s hotel room that really really needs to be remodeled. I don't know. It's just like, wow, this is so '90s. You're like, hey, '90s could be cool. It's like, nope, not this '90s. Nope.
No, no,
Um,
not this '90s. Then that whole album, I think that's a perfect description of this whole
yeah,
album.
whole album.
And again, like "Wake Up Dead Man" is another song that
Yeah,
the Slane Castle version is miles better
miles better. Yeah.
than the album version. Because when Bono was talking about the terrorist incident that was near that, because at the end of the song before, if I remember, he starts yelling names or something, and then
Yes, yes,
they
yes,
go
yes.
into "Wake Up Dead Man," and that was really powerful.
It is really powerful. Yeah, as is most live U2, quite powerful. Um, what was I just going to say? I was going to say that um, I'm drawing a blank. Yeah, yeah. I think that that they've done the best they can because they've gone on to make other fantastic music. Oh, I know what I was going to say. Despite our being very harsh to this album, it sold a lot of copies. They made money on this album, right?
They
And
did.
then they did Pop Mart, the tour that supported this album, which was like one of the most over the top rock and roll excess. The Rolling Stones, I think, would have been like, okay, scale it back, scale it back. You're going to
If the
charge
Stones
what?
are saying that, then you know you've gone overboard.
I don't know that they were, but I feel like Keith Richards somewhere was like shaking his head when he saw the giant lemon mirror ball lemon. And he's
That
like,
they would walk out of for the encore.
I spent 30 million on a what? And it's like, ah, we got the money. But the Pop Mart tour, I looked it up today. It grossed like $171 million. Like they did something right. They did something right.
We did
So
something, and like I said, the live arrangements for that tour honestly weren't bad. Like if I when I'm in the rare mood that I want to hear something from this, I don't ever go to the studio copy. I go to YouTube and I'm like, okay, give me the live version of Gone. You know?
Yeah, right. I was also reading today that I think they've done a number of tours. They did the Joshua Tree like 30th anniversary tour. They did this Songs of Experience tour or Songs of Innocence. I get those albums confused sometimes. That's for another podcast. Um, they've
Yeah.
kind of cut. They've kind of cut. Like they don't really reference pop anymore. I guess they haven't played a song from pop live in a number of years. They've kind of like
I'm curious as to when the last time that was.
yeah, I believe it was. I don't remember if they did it on the Vertigo tour, because I saw them on the Vertigo tour. I don't think they did any. They might have done Gone on there. I don't know, but it's been a while.
I can actually get you the answer to this.
All right.
Um, but it will take me a second because there's a
Yep.
really great website called Setlist FM where you can look up
Oh yeah.
artists' live statistics,
Yeah.
and you can check out when the last time like songs were played live. So, hmm. Have you ever heard that album they did in between Zeropa and Pop under the name Passengers?
Yes, I have a little bit. Because that wasn't Brian Eno heavily involved in that? I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I have heard
Yeah.
some of that. Yeah, it's pretty good. It's pretty good.
So the numbers I have for you here,
Yeah.
the last time they played a song off of Pop live
Yeah.
was actually at the Mohegan Sun Arena in Connecticut, where
Oh,
we are, in July 3rd of 2018.
really? I didn't. Okay, so I stand corrected. What did they say? What they played?
I can get you the entire set list.
Okay, I'm surprised by
Uh,
that.
oh, that's right. So it was the Experience plus Innocence tour. So they just did the Joshua Tree tour, and they weren't playing any Joshua Tree songs on this set.
Right.
Let's see.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they played it after "You're the Best Thing About Me," and they played it before that. I mean, after that, and then after "Staring at the Sun," they went into "Pride," which
Interesting.
is.
Okay.
They also played "Acrobat" on that
I
show.
know.
It's
Yes, I
crazy.
remember. Yeah, which Acrobat? Such a great song. Yeah, interesting. Okay, well there you have it. So I highly recommend that you listen to Transatlanticism. If you want to listen to pop, why not? If you're a U2 fan and you like U2's music, you have to at least, like Sam said, at least once listen to pop from beginning to end. And would love to hear your thoughts on pop.
Yeah, and then afterwards, do yourself a favor and go online and find the Pop Mart live album and be all like, "Wow, these are
Yep,
so much better live."
so much better
Still
live.
not among the best things they've done, but
Okay.
it turns it into a listenable experience.
Yep. Sam, we got to finish up for today. What's on repeat for you these days?
Um, I've been on a massive Bjork kick, as
That's
we've
right.
talked about.
You were texting me about Bjork.
I love Bjork so much. She might like actually become one of my favorites. I've
Yeah.
really been digging her song "All Is Full of Love," the single version, which is
Okay.
one of her biggest hits, but I find it to be really beautiful.
Yeah.
And what else have I been listening to on repeat? It's not on any streaming service, but you can find it on YouTube. There is
Okay.
a version of Nirvana's Aneurysm
Okay.
where they performed it live at the Nirvana Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction ceremony.
Yeah.
But instead, as you know, Kurt Cobain obviously couldn't have been there, so they had Kim Gordon from Sonic Youth sing the vocals. And she did an absolutely incredible job with it. And it was
Mm-hmm.
so punk rock in such a corporate rock setting, it made me
Mm-hmm.
incredibly happy to see.
Mm-hmm.
And
Interesting. Cool.
yeah, I think that's about it.
Okay. I don't know that I have anything on repeat. Well, kind of, sorta. There's an album that I'd like to talk about sometime on a podcast. It's an album by a band called The War on Drugs. It's called A Deeper Understanding. I listened to it a lot, and then I kind of put it away for a while. And again, there was something about this sort of fall weather, the crispness in the air, that just was like, you know what? I think I'm going to play that album. I think I've listened to it 2 or 3 times over the last maybe 4 days.
Okay.
Yeah, it's really good. It's funny. I don't remember it. I remembered it differently than I heard it this time.
Interesting.
Yeah, but I've listened to it a few times. It's a really great album. I'm sure we'll talk about it. Cool. Yeah. To end the podcast for today, every once in a while, we're going to take a random trip back in time to whatever was on the Billboard charts for a specific time and place. So we are in the week of October 10th, technically, because it's October 12th when we're recording this. I said, Sam, pick a year, random year. And Sam, you had no knowledge of this, right?
No, I had no knowledge,
So
and I
Sam
thought about
said,
it for a while, as you can attest.
Sam was like 1987. I'm like, okay. So I went to Billboard and pulled up the Hot 100 list for the week of October 10th, 1987. And the number one song on the Billboard Top 100 for that week was Here I Go Again by Whitesnake.
Oh. Any
And that's,
thoughts?
that's not really, other than I can't even really talk about it because if I talk about it, it's going to get stuck in my head and then I'm going to hate myself.
Also, I just don't want to waste my energy talking about Whitesnake
On
because,
Whitesnake. Yeah.
um,
But you know, all those years ago in 1987, man, people were jamming out to some Whitesnake in their Camaros.
that's the most 1987 thing I've ever heard.
They were doing. That's what they were doing.
Yeah, that
All
isn't
right.
surprising.
There you go. That was the top 100. That was the top song all those years ago. So
Oof.
we hope you enjoyed this episode of Generation Gap. This has been really important for me because Transatlanticism is one of my favorite albums of all time, and I'm probably going to listen to it again tomorrow just because it's Transatlanticism. So
Yeah.
we will be recording something next week, and we hope that you guys will get in touch. And we are going to try to. I feel like we will actually reach out to Ben and be like, "Hey, we do a podcast." Never
Look, if
know.
you guys, yeah, I'm calling you. I'm calling all the listeners right now. We need to start an
No,
internet movement to get Ben Gibbard on this podcast because you know that if he has a free time and he hears about it, he would do it. He is the type of person that would do it.
he would totally do it.
He
So
would totally do it.
fingers crossed. All
So
right,
we're gonna start a internet movement called Get Ben on
Generation Gap.
Generation Gap or
Yeah, yeah,
Ben Gibbard on Generation Gap. So just
love it.
so it's more directed. Yeah, yeah. I'm gonna like tweet at him like crazy and message him on Instagram, and you guys should do the same.
Let's do it. All
Yeah,
right, Sam. I'll talk to you. We'll do this next week.
yeah, absolutely.
All right. This was fun. See
This
ya.
was fun. Bye.